I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to Connor the Contrarian, a weekly podcast where I talk about movies that I liked that either the critics or the audiences didn't like. So, this week I'm going to be talking about a film from one of the most divisive directors of all time, a director that is hated by the critics, Michael Bay, and it's his film, my favorite film of his, Pain and Gain. Now, the beauty of this series is how much each episode will divide someone's opinion, and I think this one, especially a Michael Bay movie, will divide a lot of people's opinions because, like I said at the top of the show, the critics really just hate him almost every single movie. And there are a lot of, I think, audience members that sort of don't get spoken to that really love his movies, but there are also a lot of haters of his movies. But I'm a Michael Bay fan, which is why I decided to pick this movie, because it is my favorite of his, and I want to start off with a movie. Choose these ones at the beginning that I'm really passionate about, that really wanted me to start this series. Now, at the top of the show, I always like to talk about the film's cultural landscape, what it was like when the film was released, so we can understand the sort of hype that may affect things like the review scores of the time. This movie was released in 2013 and was sort of seen as Bay going back to his roots. It had the smallest budget of any of his movies, and after Bay doing 3 Transformers movies, people were sort of ready to see him do something different. He wanted to do a character piece, but still something similar but a little different than what he's done before. Unfortunately, the film received mixed to bad reviews. Most big-time critics like Pete Travers and Mark Kermode really hated the film. It only actually even grossed $86.2 million, which was one of Bay's lowest grossing films. So it had one of the smallest budgets of any of his movies, but it also had one of the lowest grossing films. And the film didn't even get good audience reviews. It has a low IMDb, low Metacritic audience score, and a low cinema score. But I'm here to defend it. Yes, I do like Michael Bay movies because I know what to expect. But this one, with say like 13 hours, I don't get. I understand Bad Boys 2 and Transformers are over the top, and I like them for that reason. I really enjoy those movies because I know what to expect, and I think they know what they are. But I generally think that this is a great movie and well directed. It's different than the Bad Boys 2 and the Transformers 4. I actually think that this is a well crafted, well directed movie, which is why I was surprised it got the scores it did. But let's start off with the beginning, or should I say the end of the movie. We open at the very end where we see Daniel Lugo, our main protagonist, played by Mark Wahlberg, getting chased by the cops. So, right away we know the fate of this particular character, that he got in some mess, and now we're going to see where he goes, and sort of how he gets there. And as we go back 6 months, we get the text on the screen that says this is based on a true story, which, keep that in the back of your mind because it may be unbelievable. We now see Daniel Lugo's life explained to us, the audience, by him, as he is one of the many narrators of the film. Really, each character has their own narration throughout the film, sort of a very ambitious, but very similar to, say, a Godfather-esque, where there's multiple narrators in the film. And with this speech, it really sort of foreshadows the future of the movie. He talks about his love of fitness as a personal trainer and his view on life, and it's really the details in this speech that tell us the plot of the movie and also sort of Daniel Lugo's outlook on life and why he thinks the way he does. And he talks about how he hates people who squander their gifts. He says it's unpatriotic, and he believes in the American dream. Very much a pro-American guy in that sense, and loves his country. And his heroes he talks about includes guys like Scarface and the cast of The Godfather because they started from nothing and got to the top. And this whole speech, while played seriously, it really sets the tone for the entire movie because we start sort of laughing at his naive sort of ignorance of a lot of these things. We understand that Daniel is narcissistic. He believes he is better than everyone else because he's worked hard to get this body. He feels he knows more stuff about other people, and neglects the fact that his heroes got big because they cheated their way to the top through illegal affairs. And yes, they built empires, but they all either died or got arrested in the end. So, not to mention, their movies, they're not real. So he really has a sort of distorted perception of life and sort of distorted perception of himself and even a perception of reality. He really believes it's his God-given right to have the American dream. He has this sort of serious machismo exterior, even though he doesn't really know anything. He's naive in a lot of senses. But the plot really starts when we see him train a new client named Victor Kershaw, played by the brilliant Tony Shalhoub. He tells him how rich he is and all the stuff he has, and Daniel is paying close attention when we get this great sort of pan in on his face, and we realize that Daniel is thinking about something even if it's not said aloud. We don't know yet, but we know that he envies Victor and really wants to be him. Then, Daniel goes to a self-help seminar by Johnny Woo, played by Ken Jeong, and this part is really hilarious, and really, once again, the beginnings are so important, but sets the tone of what the movie is going to say and how it's going to sort of structure its story around, where this guy, this character, Johnny Woo, is really a character because he's this over-the-top sort of self-help speaker, which shows how Bay really starts to immediately comment on the phony and sort of simplistic yet confusing self-help speakers, and we see how he's overexcited, and he talks about how he had this perfect wife and kids, and how he ditched it all for 7 beautiful girls and a yacht, and that's, sort of played as he's serious, right? Even though, and sort of as a motivational thing, even though the audience sees as such a ridiculous proposal. But then we hear the sort of crucial phrase that we hear throughout the movie, which is "do be a doer, don't be a don'ter." So we see Bay really make this over the top and ridiculous, but really it coincidentally and purposefully diminishes Daniel's intelligence because he just eats it up. He loves all of this stuff, and where the audience, we see it as sort of, obviously sort of mocking it, but we see it as sort of so phony and not true. And then, what is this guy, right? But Daniel, because he's so into it, we see that, oh, wow, maybe this guy isn't what he's saying in his, as smart as he says he is in his sort of opening speech, that he's really in over his head, which is a recurring theme throughout this movie. But it's because of Johnny Woo that makes Daniel Lugo want to kidnap and rob Victor. Now, going back to the satire part, I think it's really hard to make a satire because you have to toe the line with making fun of your characters so that the audience are sort of laughing on them and making maybe a social commentary or a comedic commentary, but you still have to be invested enough so you're that engaged as to the decisions the character makes, so you're still going along with the story. Maybe some people are not into that, and maybe that's a valid criticism of this movie, but I also want to make sure that Bay's not trying to make them super relatable. And I'll show you an example here. He tries to garner some sympathy with the introduction of Paul Doyle, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, where they talk about how since he's been in prison, he can't get a job, not even at Mickey D's, until Daniel really takes him under his wing. It builds sympathy for Daniel because he gave this guy a job, and garner sympathy for Paul because he is also struggling and just really wants that second chance. And Daniel, who is also in trouble with the law, knows what a second chance can do for a guy. Daniel realizes he needs a team for his kidnapping. So he convinces Paul and a fellow gym friend, Adrian Durbal, played by Anthony Mackie. So this is like the crazy thing. It's that even though we talked about how these guys need a second chance and that they've learned their lesson in prison, it just to show you how easily these guys can slip back into the criminal world. These guys are easily manipulated, and despite them thinking they work hard, it really is all for them. And this is what Bay sort of constantly does throughout the movie, which is, in a typical story, you would set up the sympathy, and they would use this for a serious sort of grounding point for the character to show that, no, this guy really is sort of a sweet guy, and we want to sympathize for the characters. But then what Bay does is it immediately undercuts it by showing how, oh, I'm done with that crime life, and then goes right back into the crime life with very little manipulation. And it's just to show that these guys, these criminals who have this sort of mindset, these aren't these aren't real criminals. These are sort of fake criminals that these are the real criminals. They're not fake criminals because they can easily slip back into crime. These aren't guys who made a bad mistake and weren't going to do it. They said they made a bad mistake. They sort of follow all the typical lines, but they know deep down that they don't really want to work hard, despite them having this sort of great body, which is that really unique contrast. But they picked on Victor because They don't think he deserves his fortune. And it's these guys, these real American guys, that do. It's, once again, this sort of American narcissism, this sort of manifest destiny that I'm better than you, therefore I should have what you have. And they should take what they want. And I think Bay, especially his style, really works well for this. His overuse of the American flag, he really plays up the patriotic factor just to undercut it with the horrific actions these guys do. I mean, we have the typical sort of 360 shot, which is very cinematic, or using GoPros to make the film even more dynamic. But it also allows the film for a natural ramping up. The panic is real because of Bay's fast editing. They really sort of do a great job, because I think that Bay is a great director in this, because he's paired well with the screenplay. It's supposed to be sort of on the surface, like these guys, sort of this machismo sort of surface level thing, but there's so much going on underneath, and you can see that really just by doing a light study of this movie. And I think it comes across well. I think, I picked it up on the first time of the movie, and I think most people will, but once you sort of study this movie like I have, you see the sort of little things that add up to the end to show how well written this movie and how sort of well constructed this movie was, which I give a lot of credit to Bay. But now they're kicking it into high gear, and we see these two very funny fail attempts of kidnaps. They first try to invade his home, but he's having dinner. Then they try to corner him in the parking lot, and they fail because they picked the wrong car. And then the third time, they kidnap him successfully, quote unquote, because once they get Victor in their warehouse, he immediately recognizes Daniel's cologne because he's his personal trainer and knows who kidnaps him. So despite them being complete morons, they still go through with the plan. And we see a montage of them torturing him until they get him to sign all of his stuff away. And we see more of the stupidity of these characters. Like when Paul socks Victor when he tries to escape, or just Daniel's lack of knowledge about a notary. He says, the one thing I've learned this entire time is really what a notary was. Eventually, they get all of his money, but once again, they have to kill him because they could ID him, right? And sort of say, hey, this is the guy that kidnapped me. But they fail. They run him over. They don't kill him, though. But now even the best part comes when Victor goes to the police, and the police don't believe Victor. Victor is explaining that, I got these kidnapped by these ninjas, and because he called his family to say, I'm going to be leaving town for a few days, just go without me. No one reported him kidnapping, so the police don't believe him. So these idiots just got away with the ultimate crime. And we see this really funny montage of the guys buying things. Paul gets addicted to coke, Adrian gets married and buys a house, and Daniel really becomes Victor by taking his house and even starts to run his deli. So meanwhile, Victor hires a private investigator, played by Ed Harris, to get his revenge. But we know this is a tragedy, and things go downhill quick. Because you gave these criminals all this money, it's like, what do you expect them to do? Paul blows all of his money up his nose on coke, and Adrian spent it on the wedding and the house. Their success lasted this really short sequence, but now we start to see the fall of them. It was supposed to be, a single, simple job for them to be set for life, but they get hungry again. Once again, showing the stupidity of these characters. We are laughing at the characters. We see that these are the real criminals. They're commenting on the sort of Hollywood glorification of these guys who are so slick and cool and can get away with anything. It's like, no, these are guys who are just normal people who are just trying to get away with things and haven't really thought things through. And, when you give criminals money, they'll obviously mismanage it. And I think that's a really key point where we're really at the point now where there's no sympathy for these guys. We're really laughing at these guys. We want to, almost in a sort of nihilistic way, see them fail. But because we know these are bad guys and that they deserve it and that they've done such harm to people for really no great motivations. And some people criticize that because the characters have no motivations. They're not relatable. But I'm sort of screaming from the hilltops they're not supposed to be relatable. They're not even anti-heroes. They're just bad guys, and we're not even sympathizing with them. They're not even trying to sympathize with them. We're making a satire of Hollywood movies and of real criminals and sort of the stupidity of what these guys do. I actually liken this movie to, say, Four Lions, which is another great comedic movie where there's these where the director sort of undercut. There's about these terrorists, but it shows how these terrorists aren't these really smart guys, but that they're really dumb and don't know what they're doing and can't even set a bomb up. It's the only thing they can do. So check out that one if you want to see another funny movie. And really, at this point now, the crazy thing is that the movie reminds you that this is a true story. Daniel even says that he watches a lot of movies, so he knows what he is doing, which is, obviously sort of a wink and nudge to the audience. But adding that this is still a crazy true story only adds to the appeal of the movie. But this time, going back to the plot, they need a new job, so they're going after a new target. Unfortunately, it goes way, way worse. They trick him into having him invest in a fake business, but he's smarter. He wants to see the board and makes a fatal mistake. He calls Daniel an amateur. Oh, and Daniel gets really offended by this and out of rage kills the guy. Now they're screwed. They're amateurs. They really are. And here is where we see the amazing acting by everyone. Daniel, played by Mark Wahlberg, who has been really the stoic leader the entire time, is freaking out. He's really panicking, and his macho is starting to fade. This sort of exterior is starting to fade. And then we have some funny parts with Anthony Mackie and the sort of consequences he will run into with his wife, and how he's dealing with stuff on a whole other level. Just sort of funny bits that he has here. And Paul, who was sort of up on coke and always like sort of energetic, now sort of is calm, sort of strangely calm. So there's a really sort of different contrast between all the characters. But eventually they decide to cut up the body and dump it into a river. And now we're at the beginning of the movie again. We see Daniel getting chased by the police and everyone else getting arrested. We knew the fall was going to happen, but we wanted to see how it went down. It plays like a Greek tragedy in that way. Daniel and Adrian get sentenced to life, and Paul gets 15 years because he snitched. This is not just a crime movie. It's much more. It's a story about American excess, directed beautifully by Michael Bay, who uses his stylized patriotic view of America as a surface-level sort of phoniness that is only undercut by the stupidity of the characters. Like, the characters, they look like superheroes on the outside, but on the inside, they're really cowards. They have this sort of incredible sort of physique on the outside, but really their moral strength, their ethics are so strong, they're really so weak on the inside. And Michael Bay mentioned that this movie kind of reveals the real Bay, who he actually is. And I was thinking about it, and it's almost a brilliant meta-commentary of what Michael Bay feels. He thinks he is this big-time director, but on the inside doesn't know a lot, which is something that we see with a lot of artists, of people that think they're a phony and don't really know it and sort of are trying to hide it to the public. And these characters, in a lot of ways, are so ignorant and sort of naive that they don't realize that they're phony. They're just sort of going along with it. And I think, viewed in this light, it's almost hard not to admit Pain and Gain is this great movie. Now, you may say that satire is unintentional. You may chalk it all up to coincidence, but I take the director's side a lot of the time. They are the creative visionary of the movie. And I know the movie really better than any sort of audience member. So I give them the benefit of the doubt that this was his intent. And I actually find this movie to be a generational movie, despite the user reviews. Everyone I had recommended this movie to has loved it. And even if you look up the reviews on YouTube, look up Jeremy Johns, Chris Stuckman, just look up Pain and Gain review on YouTube, you see the comment section, and they're all like, I really enjoyed this movie. I think, you sort of misinterpreted it. And I don't really do this at all, because movies are an art form, and therefore every opinion is valid, because art is inherently subjective. But in this time I think the critics maybe misread it, maybe even kind of got it wrong. It seemed like a lot of them didn't understand the dark comedy and the sort of satire going on. They wanted to relate to the characters when Bay was trying to do the opposite. We are laughing at these guys and enjoy seeing these guys go downhill because we don't like these characters. Every attempt to make them sympathetic is almost immediately undercut. They wanted to cheat their way to the top and failed. I love Pain and Gain for all these reasons, because it uses these meathead bro types that on the surface is a dumb crime movie, but underneath is a brilliant commentary on American culture, Hollywood crime movies, and yes, maybe even Bay himself. And that's why I truly believe Pain and Gain is a great movie. So I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. Make sure to check me out on YouTube. I've got a whole other YouTube channel, Connor Old, where I also post these episodes. I'm trying to get this onto iTunes. You can be listening to it either on SoundCloud or YouTube right now, and I'm going to be trying to get this as many places as possible. But just stay tuned. You can follow me on Twitter at Connor Old. I tweet every once in a while. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. And until next time, stay tuned.